My name is Garrett, and this story happened when I was a sophomore in college. After freshman year, I didn't get a dorm, so I had to scramble for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op, part of a 3-house community that was sort of near campus, but not really. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options. I had a bike, so I didn't mind the extra travel. Most of the residents were students like me, but there were a few exceptions, a couple of alumni, 1 or 2 TAs, and some older folks finishing their degrees. But the person who immediately stood out to me was an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. She looked like she was in her late 50s, maybe older. Her hair was graying, and she walked with a limp, like she had some kind of back injury. She was quiet, always kept to herself, and wore this permanently blank expression. I assumed she was somehow tied to the university, maybe faculty, maybe alumni, but no one explained, and I didn't ask. The first time I saw her do something strange was in our shared kitchen, which was odd in itself. The other 2 houses had their own kitchens, so I didn't know why she was using ours. But she wasn't cooking, or eating, or talking. She was just standing there while the rest of us were buzzing around, making dinner, talking, listening to music. She didn't try to join in. She just stood there, watching. And maybe it was in my head, but I felt like she was watching me, specifically. No one else even acknowledged her. That struck me as weird. Maybe they knew something I didn't. A few days later, I was doing homework in my room when I saw her again. I glanced out my bedroom window, and there she was, standing in the middle of the street, looking up, not on the sidewalk, not passing by, just staring. It was late and cold, and she looked like she'd been standing there for a while. Was she looking directly into my window, or just in the general direction? I wasn't sure, but it felt like her gaze was locked onto me, and for some reason, I waved. I regretted it instantly. She didn't wave back. She just jumped up and down a few times like she was excited. Then she turned and ran off toward one of the other houses, presumably hers. My stomach dropped. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I'd confirmed that she was watching my window, and now she knew exactly which room was mine. Later that night, I brought her up to one of my housemates. He told me she'd always been around, and that it was best to just ignore her, like everyone else did. He didn't know anything else, just what someone had told him when he moved in. That didn't sit right with me, so I kept asking around until I finally got some kind of answer. One of the seniors in her house said she was connected to the university somehow, and while she was a little kooky, she'd never been violent. When I asked why no one seemed to care, he told me that who lived there was up to the property manager. They couldn't do much about it. Not a satisfying answer, but what could I do? I tried to push it out of my mind, but things got worse. One night I stepped out of my room and almost ran straight into her. She was just standing there, right outside my door. I physically jumped back. It was past midnight on a Tuesday, and the house was dead quiet. She didn't say a word, didn't react, just turned around and walked away like I was the one in the wrong. That wasn't the last time either. There were several more incidents, catching her snooping around places she shouldn't be, doing things that made no sense. Then, I lost my room key. The houses used to be part of a hotel, so all the rooms had their own locks. It was a co-op, so most people didn't lock their doors, but I always did. I couldn't sleep unless I knew my room was secure. I had a spare key, thankfully, but losing the original was a huge headache. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't know why, but then I heard it, a soft bumping sound, coming from my closet every 20 seconds or so, like something shifting inside. I'm not the type to scare easily, and I'm definitely not helpless. I decided to deal with it myself. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and crept toward the closet. I took a deep breath, and in one swift motion, I ripped the door open, screaming like a maniac. She was in there. The woman was crouched inside my closet, a necktie of mine wrapped around her neck. Her eyes were wide, and in one hand she held a kitchen knife. She lunged at me. This time my scream wasn't for show. It was pure terror. I managed to wrestle her to the ground and disarm her. She was small and frail, but that didn't make it any less horrifying. She fought like a wild animal, kicking, scratching, biting, while I screamed for help. My friend Lee came running and helped me hold her down. Someone else called the police. The rest of the night is kind of a blur. The cops showed up fast and arrested her. She had stopped screaming by then, but she didn't say a word either, just went completely blank again. They found my lost room key in her pocket. No surprise there. A few weeks later, we finally got the full story. She was the property manager's sister. He'd been secretly letting her live in one of the unoccupied rooms. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her proper care, he just dumped her there. He was arrested for negligence, among other charges, and honestly, I blame him way more than I blame her. I actually feel bad for her. She needed help, real help, but pity doesn't erase the fact that she tried to kill me. I could have died that night. I still have no idea why she seemed so fixated on me, and I hope I never find out. I'm graduating soon, and while I'll definitely miss college, I don't think I'll ever be able to look back without thinking about her. This isn't exactly my story, but I watched it unfold right in front of me, so I'm going to tell it anyway. My name's Margaret, and I've lived in the same modest 2-story house with my husband, Benjamin, for the better part of 20 years. All of our kids are grown now, living their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder. This happened last year. The house across the street had been sitting vacant for a while, and I was getting tired of staring at it every day. So when someone finally moved in, I was relieved. It was nice to see some life over there again. Since I'm retired, I spend a lot of time on the front porch, knitting, reading, enjoying the weather with Benjamin. Sometimes I listen to music, sometimes a true crime podcast. It's my little slice of peace. The person who moved in was a young man, maybe mid-20s. He drove a sleek BMW and wore flashy designer-style clothes. I figured he was either doing really well for himself or doing a good job pretending. But don't get me wrong, he was a sweet guy. He introduced himself a few days after moving in. His name was Quinn. He told us he'd graduated a few years ago and worked in entertainment. Freelance work for some internet personality, whatever that means. Honestly, it went over my head, but he seemed to be doing well for himself. He and Benjamin hit it off right away, talking sports, cracking jokes, even sharing some college stories I hadn't heard from Ben in years. Quinn was smart, charming, and respectful. I liked him. For a few months, things were normal. Quinn would often wave at me from his driveway, and I always waved back. He became part of the neighborhood, not loud, not intrusive, just present. At some point, I started noticing a young woman visiting his house now and then. She drove a little white convertible and looked to be in her early 20s. Blonde, dressed in a way that was, well, a bit much, in my opinion. The kind of girl you'd expect a guy like Quinn to date, if I'm being honest. She had a key, so I figured she was his girlfriend. She'd stop by once or twice a week, usually when Quinn wasn't home, let herself in, stay for a while, and leave. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I told myself that young people date differently these days, not my business. Then one evening, I finally saw them together. Quinn pulled into the driveway with her in the passenger seat. That confirmed it. They were a couple. Not long after that, though, things seemed to shift. One afternoon, I was tending my little garden when I heard yelling. I looked up and saw Quinn and the girl arguing in his driveway. She was furious, flailing her arms, yelling so loud I could almost make out the words. It looked like she might hit him. Eventually, she stormed off, jumped into her car, and sped down the street. Quinn just stood there for a moment, shaking his head before going back inside. I don't even think he saw me. It seemed like a lover's quarrel, not my place to interfere. But then, I noticed her car parked in front of his house again, multiple times, and always when Quinn wasn't home. I told Benjamin about it. He just shook his head and told me not to be nosy, to let the poor boy live his life. I agreed, until the night everything unraveled. It was late, and Benjamin and I were already asleep when we woke up to sirens, blaring sirens. We rushed outside, joining a small group of neighbors on the sidewalk. Quinn's house was swarming with police, lights flashing, officers shouting, and an ambulance out front. Then we saw her, the girl, being led out in handcuffs. She didn't fight, didn't scream, just stared blankly ahead like none of it fazed her. Then they wheeled Quinn out on a stretcher. He was covered in blood. I gasped. We hadn't seen anything that horrifying in all our years here. After that night, Quinn disappeared for a while. A week, maybe more. I was worried sick. When he finally returned, Benjamin and I went over to check on him. He welcomed us in and told us everything. Her name was Ellie. He said she confessed to everything, which made it easier for the police to sort things out. For starters, she wasn't supposed to have his house key. She'd stolen the spare and made a copy without him knowing. She'd become possessive, started asking for expensive things, dinners, jewelry, trips. When Quinn hesitated, she got angry. That's when the relationship started to fall apart. Every time she showed up at his house uninvited, he hadn't known how she found him. Turns out she had access to his phone location. I didn't even know that was possible. She had gone through all of his belongings, and worst of all, she planted hidden cameras in his bedroom. Every time she visited while he was out, she was checking the cameras, replacing batteries, making sure they still worked. The argument I overheard, that was him trying to end things. She refused, so he offered a break, hoping it would ease the situation. But Ellie saw everything, through the cameras. The next night, she showed up with a knife. I won't go into the details. You can imagine. She attacked him. He managed to wrestle her to the ground, but not before she did real damage. The doctors told him he was an inch away from needing surgery, an inch away from dying. Benjamin and I did our best to comfort him, but he was clearly shaken. traumatized. The last thing he said before we left his house was this: "I've learned my lesson about flaunting money, especially around pretty girls." He moved out soon after, said he couldn't sleep in that house anymore. He was afraid, said Ellie had friends just like her, and he didn't want any of them knowing where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray to God that boy is doing okay. No one should have to go through something like that, especially someone so young. When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex, the kind that makes staying in your old city impossible. I came into some money early in life, and like a lot of people in that position, I made a few bad calls, especially with the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to was great. Quiet, low crime, mostly families. The kind of place where people wave as they walk their dogs or mow their lawns. Most of the houses were spaced far apart, one of the reasons I chose it. But for some reason, the property right next to mine was way closer than the rest. And it was massive, like stupid big. When I first saw it, I thought it must have been built to house a family of 10. I assumed that's what it was, a big extended family, maybe with grandparents and teenagers all under one roof. I could not have been more wrong. Even though I liked to keep to myself, I didn't want to come off as rude. So after I got settled, I made a point of introducing myself to the neighbors. Everyone I met was friendly, warm. Most of them were young parents. And yeah, I'll admit, they were a little intimidating. They all seemed wildly successful. Wasn't sure how a single guy in his late 20s was supposed to fit in around so many kids and golden retrievers. But whatever. That was my own hang-up. For some reason, I saved my next-door neighbor for last. I don't know why. Maybe I was just worn out from all the small talk that day. But I knew if I didn't do it then, I'd probably put it off forever. So I sucked it up and walked over. I was expecting someone middle-aged, maybe a dad in a polo shirt, maybe a stern-looking grandmother. Instead, a guy about my age answered the door, maybe even younger. He had a mullet and this huge, friendly grin, like I'd caught him on the best day of his life. He interrupted me mid-introduction with, "Oh wow, someone born in my decade. What a nice surprise." We both laughed, and I admitted how out of place I felt as a single guy, surrounded by families. He told me not to worry. Most people here kept it to themselves. It was kind of a relief to hear. He introduced himself as Damon and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged and joked, "Hell, why not right now?" I expected him to laugh and let me in, but instead, he looked over his shoulder, kind of like he was checking the room, then turned back and said, "Wish I could, but I'm working." I asked what he did. Normal follow-up, right? But his expression shifted slightly. Smile faded just for a second. Then he forced a laugh and said, "Finance," without elaborating. Bit odd, but okay. I asked if he had roommates. He said no. He lived there alone. That shocked me. The place was huge. No way I could afford a house that size on my own, and mine wasn't even half the size of his. We chatted a bit more, and he gave me his number before heading back inside. I was glad someone my age lived next door, and he seemed cool. But I couldn't stop thinking about how strange it was that he lived alone in that giant place. Anyway, life went on. That was about 6 months ago. A few days later, I texted Damon to set something up, but he always claimed to be busy. Apologetic, polite, but still busy. Eventually, I gave up. Not in a bitter way, just one of those you do you situations. I wasn't going to keep reaching out to someone who clearly didn't have time. Still, I never saw anyone coming or going from his place. No visitors, no parties, no takeout deliveries, nothing. And yet, his car was always there. I work from home, and my office is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property. I wasn't trying to spy or anything. His house was just in my line of sight. Still, over time, I started noticing how little he actually moved. The guy lived like a ghost. Then came that night, a Wednesday. I remember because I had an early meeting the next day. It was 2 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so I figured I just caught the tail end of a dream. But the sound was real. I got up and peeked outside. Damon's driveway was full. At least 7 cars lined up, full-blown house party vibes. Now, I'm not a prude. I've thrown my fair share of parties. But this was midweek, and the volume was out of control. I figured I'd just knock and ask him to turn it down. Threw on a hoodie, walked over. When I got to the door, no one answered. I considered texting him, but figured it would just be ignored. Next morning, I tried again, knocked harder this time. Still nothing. Out of instinct, I reached for the handle, and the door swung open. The first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the entryway, at least 10 pairs. But the house, completely silent and empty. No one in the living room, no one in the kitchen, no empty bottles, no red Solo cups, nothing, except the music was still playing. Only now I realized it wasn't music at all. It was a recording. People laughing, glasses clinking, distant chatter. It was a loop, a party simulation, which didn't make sense. The shoes were real. The cars were real. Someone had to be here. I should have left right then, but something in me needed answers. I crept deeper into the house until I noticed a door ajar. It led to the basement. I don't know why. I just knew that whatever was happening, the answers were down there. The basement was pitch black, except for a faint light coming from a door farther in. I crept toward it, and that's when I heard it, a mechanical grinding sound, heavy and rhythmic, like a saw or some kind of machinery. As I got closer, I peeked through the crack in the door. 3 men stood in the room, backs to me. Older men wearing heavy-duty work gear, gloves, goggles, boots. They weren't looking at each other. They were all focused on something just out of my view. The smell hit me next. Bleach. Something harsh. Chemical. And suddenly, my stomach dropped. I turned to leave. Quietly. Carefully. Then, click. The light dimmed behind me. Someone had shut the basement door. I didn't wait to confirm. I bolted up the stairs, through the house, and straight out the front door. I didn't run home directly. I cut through my backyard and went in through the side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding. I crept up to my 3rd floor office, kept the lights off, and crouched below the window to watch Damon's house. At first, nothing. Then, the front door burst open. 8 men came out, all older, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street, but Damon wasn't with them. Some of the men looked like they were arguing. One shoved another, like a fight was about to break out. But eventually, they went back inside. The music stopped. I sat there trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I considered calling the cops, but what would I even report? There was no crime I could prove. And the neighbors, how had none of them heard that party? I asked around the next day, knocked on a few doors, casually brought it up. Not a single person heard anything. That was months ago. Damon never came back. His car is gone. His lawn is overgrown. Packages have piled up by his door. It could be nothing, but why would someone stage a fake party with sound recordings, planted shoes, parked cars? Unless they were trying to hide something, and if they were that careful, why would they forget to lock the front door? Maybe that's what those men were arguing about. Maybe someone screwed up. I don't know. I've got too many questions and zero answers. And if Damon ever comes back, I'm not sure if I want to ask him anything or if I should just keep my mouth shut.